Welcome everybody. My name is Garrett Lang. I asked a bunch of other people who wanted to introduce themselves, so I'll introduce myself. I'm a software developer turned award-winning software inventor in North Jersey. I am now a serial entrepreneur, and my hobby is writing and discussing practical. I've always called it practical philosophy, but I'm going to call it practical wisdom because someone recently informed me that philosophy is no longer about wisdom, and I find that interesting. They apparently the philosophy has what are called the wisdom traditions, which is old school philosophy, which is what I think of as philosophy. Now it's about intellectually interesting things that add no value to anyone on Earth, and I find that a complete waste of time for anyone. More beneficial to just create beautiful art or dance or something like that than to create intellectually interesting puzzles that add no value to anyone. But anyway, that's my critique of modern philosophy that is impractical. So anyway, this event is brought to you by the Freethinker Institute. We're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. The FTI focuses on helping members always be polite, be the best version of ourselves, seek truth, and to be fair. That's the first of our six intentions, which are our common values. We do that through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. We also have weekly members only events. If you want to apply to be a member of the Freethinker Institute, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to learn more about the FTI in general, including about membership. We really create a new friend circle of people who value those attributes to be polite, be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth rather than seek to be right and to be fair. And we meet right now on a weekly basis, although every pod as we grow will choose its own cadence. So you can email me. We also have uh, in-person events in North Jersey and New York City. And if you want to email me to get invited, to get calendar invites to either of those, let me know. And no, Frank, I like Bertrand Russell in a lot of ways, but the he's kind of older than modern. But it's not to say that there are no good modern philosophers. Just to be clear, I can't usually read the chat, but I noticed that from Frank and a couple other things. But I generally won't be able to read the text chat. And actually, Carl, if you can moderate the text chat for politeness, that is the only rule that we have here at the FTI is to always be polite to each other. We do enforce that strictly because that keeps us in the critical thinking part of our brain rather than the emotional part of our brain. Most of the time, when we talk about incendiary topics, which we do all the time in the FTI intentionally, we want to show that you can talk about incendiary topics even in a big group, but still be polite about it and stay in the logical part of our brain so that we're not getting emotionally hijacked, or worse, fight or flight hijacked, where we're not really thinking straight or clearly and we're making poor decisions. So that said, I like to say when you disagree with someone strongly, you have way more to learn by asking them why they think what they think than you do by saying you're wrong and I'm right and this is why, which I call the logic hammer. So let's try to be empathetic. And we did another event on empathetic Socratic dialogue, which I think is the right way to have conversations about this stuff. We're all works in progress, so we can help each other sort of follow that rule, including me. I'm also a work in progress there, but trying to do it more and more. So that said, tonight's topic was originally about corporate tax, but actually, I think we've started the conversation out and have been talking about all kinds of tax. And I think that's appropriate because really taxes are interconnected. If you don't charge tax in one place, you have to charge it in another. Some of the comments in the chat have been about, well, I don't want to pay tax because my tax dollars are going to things that I don't support. And so we can touch on those things as well. Just to talk about sort of the logistics of the event, we're going to limit each time you raise your hand, you can introduce a new topic, and you can either make a comment or ask a question, introducing one new topic at a time. Limit that to less than 2 or 3 minutes, ideally two, so that we can keep going back and forth. After someone introduces a new topic, we can have free-for-all conversation where people just jump in when someone finishes speaking. Don't interrupt people. You will get moderated for that and asked not to interrupt. But if we don't interrupt, we can just jump in after someone finishes and go back and forth, even in a large group. It works pretty well. So, um, if you yeah, and so I think that's all kind of the ground rules. So I guess, you know, I guess like when we're talking about what's a fair tax, like a fair tax, I guess there are a couple of different dimensions that we could take. We could say, like, what's a fair tax for people at different socioeconomic levels, right? And I think, Milton Friedman actually, even though he's a conservative guy, he had a really good solution for this that I liked anyway, which is the idea of a negative income tax. So, if someone is really poor, instead of paying tax, they receive money, they receive tax money. And what that does is it prevents people from starving to death in the wealthiest country in the world, which I kind of think is an ethical thing to do. So I'm curious, and maybe we can start off with conversation or a poll on whether or not, and we can have kind of a list of different topics that we can go through. But I'm curious whether or not people agree, and I think we'll have some people who probably don't agree with this, and I would love to hear the reasons why that people who are wealthier should be paying the majority of the tax, which is true today, by the way. They're just paying a much smaller percentage of their disposable income than poor people. But the majority of tax does come from top income earners because they have, I guess we have the most money. But so anyone want to disagree with the idea that a fair tax is largely placed on the wealthy? Go ahead,
I
Carl.
think the issue you're going to get into is how do you
Well,
define wealthy and how do you define poor?
yeah. So I live in Washington State, and Washington State does not have an income tax. And I don't know how the hell they do it. And I know it's not the only state in the country. We do have a pretty high sales tax. But I believe that most of the taxes come from businesses and corporations, which makes sense to me. Um, so I'm not sure if there's a percentage of like where you do have to have income tax past a certain amount. I don't know, but I don't think
You
there is.
know, this is fascinating, Carl. I looked it up, and actually, we talked last week about how most corporate taxes are taxes on profits. Washington is the only state I'm aware of, and I'm sure there are others because it says this is unusual, but not doesn't say it's the only one. They
Yeah.
tax revenue. Even if the company is unprofitable, Washington taxes corporate
Oh,
revenues. It's called the B&O tax. And so
okay.
that, and there's also a heavy property tax. There's
Yeah.
an excise tax on gasoline, cigarettes, tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, like et cetera, and
Yeah.
then fees and miscellaneous tolls, registration fees. But the other ones are the big ones, and sales tax is the biggest one.
Yeah.
With local taxes, it can be 9 to 10%. That's a lot of sales tax. So
That is, yeah.
yeah,
But it seems that it's fair to me because I feel like those who have more money um, and buy more stuff would pay more tax, right? Automatically from the sales tax. If they drive more than other people, because I'm thinking those who are poor or those who are middle class or even, they still have an income but not a lot, uh, don't pay as much in sales tax, don't pay taxes. Um, and the last thing I want to say is I'm a big fan of the negative tax idea.
yeah, I
That
think
makes
it's really cool. So, really curious. Let's if we could stick to one. I want to stick to one assertion at a time. My goal is to like try to get everyone's opinions out about that assertion. And my first assertion, and we can come up with other ones after this, is that the wealthy should pay more tax because they have more money. And so, do we consider that fair that the wealthy pay more tax because we have more money? And so I'm curious from the hands up whether or not people agree or disagree with that. I'm going to try to stick to that topic, and then we'll get to other topics too. So, Ken, go ahead.
So I think that question is somewhat vacuous until we have a discussion on what we mean by wealth and poverty. So I have two comments. That's one. I've had discussion in another context, and compared to many people on the globe, we're Elon Musk. I mean, we have that much wealth compared to many people on the globe. So that discussion about what is wealthy and what is poor is important. Then very quickly, Garrett, just to go through this because it's a little bit of history. originally people were just sole proprietors of a business. If you had a bakery, you were the sole proprietor. And then they moved to partnerships. And so you might be have a partnership, say an accounting firm or something. And then basically to do trade, you needed capital. You need to come up with a lot of money to get that ship over to India, for example, before the money came back. And so that the joint stock corporation was created. Then, of course, it was the issue because people put money in, but there was unlimited liability. So then became the limited liability corporation where you could invest in stocks and you could not lose everything. So this, when we talk about the corporation, what we're talking about is a limited liability corporation. And by the way, 70% of people, even middle and not poor, but middle class people own stocks. So when you tax a corporation, you can be taxing your grandma who doesn't have a lot of money
Yeah,
because
so
a
just
lot of people own stocks in corporations today.
Just to be clear, Ken, we're not just talking about corporate tax today. We've broadened it, and so we're talking about taxes in general. So the first assertion is just about whether or not the wealthy should pay more tax than the poor. And you can measure that in any number of ways, and I don't think it's vacuous in any way that you measure it. Like whatever you set as the standard for wealthy or poor, like it's always a meaningful question. And I'm curious whether or not is there anyone that agrees with Ken that the statement is meaningless?
Uh, I don't agree with Ken, but I agree that we should define what is wealth and what is poverty.
So
That's my point.
the general standard there is over $100,000 USD a year of income in an average US town is basically the point at which more money doesn't significantly increase your happiness. So I would
Oh,
say people making over $100,000 a year should pay more tax than people paying making under $100,000 a year. And I would go on to say that it should be gradient, like someone making $10 million dollars a year should be making paying more tax than someone making $100,000 a year. So we can put standards to it using science and psychology, and so I've just done that, and maybe that'll make it a little more clear for people who have trouble
could I
there.
ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
People talk about like let's say 10%, and they say 10% for everybody. Wouldn't that be fair? Because the less
No.
money, no? How
No,
come?
because when you're taking tax, you're taking money from what's called disposable income. And so disposable income is how much money you have left over after your needs. If you're not making $100,000 a year, you're having to decide sometimes between should I get medicine for my child or should I feed my child?
Right.
And that's not a good place to be, right? And so if you're charging the same tax to that person as you are to someone making $10 million a year, does that
Right.
feel fair to you? Like where you're literally taking food and medicine away from someone who can't make ends meet because even though they're working two jobs or three jobs, they still can't make ends meet. Like that's
Well,
clearly not fair. I hope we can agree on that.
right. Right. I meant more like if somebody who makes $10 million, and let's say that's profit, 10% would be 100,000. So they're paying more than somebody who makes
More
50.
in quantitative, but they're not paying more in terms of disposable income because that
I,
person has $9.9 million dollars in disposable income, whereas the
oh,
person that's making $100,000 has $5,000 of disposable income, maybe.
I
And so
see what you
charging a 10% tax on someone who only has 5% disposable income versus someone who has
Yeah.
99.9% disposable income,
Yeah.
so if you wanted to charge a tax, you could do it on disposable income, like a flat tax on disposable income. But even that, I don't think is fair. That's why I
Mm.
said, like,
Carl,
is it true that more tax should be paid the more money that people make, not just in quantitative amount, but in percentage?
but Carl, if I
Because
can ask you a question. So let's
Define
say you're a
fair.
person and you work 7 days a week really hard and you make 100,000.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of lazy. I don't want to work.
Yeah.
Why should I take money from you and your hard labor to subsidize me and my laziness?
I don't think that's the like how is someone that's making $100,000 a year subsidizing anyone?
No, my point is, we also have to consider how that money is made. I mean, if you make $100,000 a year and you're taxed, that tax is going to go into somewhere. And if I'm lazy, you're essentially kind of paying that tax on my behalf.
So
So
how would you do that, Ken?
how would I do that?
Yep.
I think I think what you have to do is it comes back to this idea of wealth and poverty. that, things always get complicated at the margin. But to say that $100,000 makes you wealthy and you should be taxed at a very high rate, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that.
Yeah,
I also don't think the poor should suffer. But
yeah.
also, maybe if you're lazy and you don't want to work, maybe your standard of living should be fairly low.
Can
It
I
is.
ask you?
It is. Like anyone that's lazy and not working that isn't in like didn't inherit a lot of wealth is going to have a low standard of living. There's no one at that level that's making 20, $30,000 a year that's living high on the hog can. And if you think they are, I would recommend meeting them and seeing what they live like them for a week and then tell me if they're living like a great life. I guarantee that you will never want to do it again and that you will have a little more empathy for someone who's going through that. If you want to talk about lazy people that should be getting more tax, it's the people who inherited their wealth. People who inherited their wealth can be extremely lazy, do nothing, and still make far more money than someone working three jobs making $100,000 a year. Just because they inherited their wealth. They did nothing to get that money other than winning the birth lottery. Literally nothing. That's
You're
unfair.
This
Can I,
word
you're
can I
fair
answer
sure
the
gets
question?
the word fair sure gets thrown around
yeah.
loose, loosely here. We're not defining what fair means.
Okay, let me do
You know,
that. Yeah,
but
thank
That's
you.
way.
let me just say one thing.
Sure.
You know, there's a moral and ethical fairness, and I do believe that people that are sleeping on the streets should be brought off the streets because it's good for us because of another reason for fairness, economic fairness, in that. If you take people off the streets, a percentage of them are going to, probably get a job or be more productive, and so that's another form of fairness. So, what's the definition of fairness?
Yeah, thank you. Let me describe that. So the way we define fair in the Freethinker Institute is in two steps. Level one is that every human being, full stop, globally should be protected from significant unnecessary harm. And what that means is that unnecessary harm is a harm that prevents a greater harm. So if I see someone shooting school children and I have a gun, I'm going to shoot him. I'm going to cause harm, but I prevent the greater harm from him shooting school children. Now, a significant harm is one where if you were put in front of a randomly selected jury of peers, that were a lot, like in a court situation, and that jury said that the harm that you caused was so bad that it deserves legal punishment, like that's their intuition, then that's a significant harm. You call someone a jerk, no jury is going to accuse you of like causing significant harm. Does
Garrett,
that
it
make
sounds
sense
like
as
you're,
step number one to anyone disagree with that as being fair?
if I can just reframe that a little bit, it sounds like you're saying essentially fairness is some level of rule of law in society and some level of social safety net to prevent, the most downtrodden amongst us from, falling through the cracks.
So I didn't specifically say those things. You can,
I'm reframing, yes.
yeah, yeah. So I think that how we define significant unnecessary harm as society
Mhm.
is a discussion. Like it's a discussion, but if we can agree that causing significant unnecessary harm by the definitions I just said, like if you think, Sean, that, you know, like let's say you said having a social safety net, like what would be a case where you think having a social safety net would fit into that definition?
I mean, like perhaps Medicare, maybe healthcare for all, maybe welfare, disability, unemployment, all those type of things would fit within that.
No, they don't fit in that definition inherently, unless there are people who are too poor to afford those things, right? You don't need to have those social safety nets if no one's too poor to afford those things. So, the only reason that you would say that those things are required is if people are too poor to afford them otherwise. So
Maybe
I
you can
don't
give
think it
some
inherently
examples.
requires that there be a social safety net to prevent significant unnecessary harm. I think in today's American society, yes, like there is significant unnecessary harm happening to people, but you have to have a person that's causing that significant unnecessary harm, um, that that could be put like in front of a jury, right? So when you're talking about a social safety net, who would you put in front of a jury to say that this person was caused significant unnecessary harm? Um, like I don't see how you could frame that argument
So I
unless you're
clearly
going to
got
put the government on trial.
so Garrett, I clearly got what you were talking about wrong. So can you clarify? Can you give
I
us some examples of specifically like what you mean when you say
If I
that?
punch you in the face and I cause you to bleed, that is significant unnecessary harm. I didn't need to punch you in the face.
Got it. So like rule of law, things protecting our rights, protecting our
Give me
bodily
one second. This is
health.
the second time this customer calling.
Okay.
Carl, can you host for a second?
Yeah. I think I see your point, Sean. But I think you're both agreeing. I mean, he just gave a couple of examples. Your reframe sounds fair, but it's still the same thing. And
Got
then
it.
also last week, I remember it got to a point where people were arguing about fairness, and I just looked it up in the dictionary. It was a very simple
Yeah.
one sentence thing, and it pretty much satisfied everybody.
People,
So
I feel like it's people being treated the same,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
would be a fair way to say it.
Shall
I
we
had a,
go?
I had a, oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was going to say there's two hands ahead of you. If we,
Yep, that's fine.
Stephen and then Sunny and then Sean. Go ahead, Stephen, if you have something to add. Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I most of the states get most of their revenue from from the sales tax, and that is a regressive tax,
Yeah.
meaning that it falls on lower income people more so than higher income people. As far as the tax is a proportional part of their disposable income. So
Mhm.
I tend to think we ought to have less regressive taxes, I guess you would say, if you're talking about fairness. And the states, other than Washington, which does have that B&O tax, although the B&O tax is actually not imposed on very small amounts of business revenue. I think the limit is around $50,000, something like that in revenue, where if you have less than that, you don't have to pay um, any um, B&O tax. And the B&O tax is a small percentage, as we were talking about last week, that if you had a revenue tax, that it would be a much smaller percentage than what, say, the corporate income tax is now of the net, when it's taxed on net income. But again, I just think that the regressive taxes, folks in legislatures need to look at those a little bit more. Although I find, especially in the two states I'm most familiar with, North Carolina, South Carolina, they both tend to lean pretty heavily on the sales tax for revenue.
And corporate taxes too, businesses, right?
To some extent, but the corporate income tax rate is not very high either in South Carolina or North
Right.
Carolina. South Carolina has been talking about eliminating the corporate tax.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, no, I'm aware that in California, a lot of businesses are leaving California because the taxes are supposed to be too high, and they're ending up in Austin, Texas.
I'm
Yeah,
curious if
Texas
we
doesn't
could.
have Texas and Florida in the South don't have income tax.
Yeah. You were saying, Garrett?
I want to take a poll on who agrees that causing significant unnecessary harm. Does anyone else have questions on what is meant by significant unnecessary harm after my definitions?
No, I think we all kind of agree.
Okay, I just want to take a quick poll on, agree, disagree. Um,
You want to do an official poll or just
yeah,
rate? Okay.
Who's
We've
against getting
mastered
punched in the face?
we've mastered the Zoom's polling thing, which always brings people headaches.
I know it's actually pretty terrible UX. Whoever the product person is, I guarantee they're an epitist because it is not like
Uh,
a
while
skilled
you
person.
while you figure this out, why don't we let Sunny
Yeah.
go next? Go ahead, Sunny.
Yeah, to Garrett's question, wealthy people have to pay more tax compared to the others, I would agree totally, 100% yes. Because they do spend more money anyway. Take, for example, to maintain a $50 million yacht, it takes 5 to 7 million per year to maintain it. So they're
Wow.
spending the money, right? So it's just it doesn't make any sense saying, "Oh, they worked very hard, they deserve it, so let them keep it." No, they are spending anyway to maintain the yacht. 10 to 15% of the yacht's value is what they spend yearly to maintain that. So they are already doing that. That kind of proves that they can pay higher taxes. That's my argument.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in fact, Sonny, what the research says is that over $100,000, in order to get a linear amount of happiness, you need to double your money. So having more money over $100,000, yeah, it makes you a little happier, but you literally have to double your money, your income in order to be a significant amount happier. So having an extra 5, 10, 15% tax is not really significantly impacting the happiness of people who are wealthy. Now they're going to complain about it. They'll even move to other states and other countries, but actually they're the ones that suffer the most because they lose all the relationships in their home area. And the truth is, when you're at that wealth level, like relationships matter a hell of a lot more than money. Like money isn't what's making you happy. What's making you happy is the relationships you have. Being able to walk over to my next door neighbor who's my wine buddy and to just be able to have a glass of wine with him. I'd gladly pay an extra 5% tax to just have my friends in my town, be able to be like the people that I hang out with when I want to hang out with someone. So, like I
I
think
think yeah, I was gonna
the
say, Rob, the problem is psychological
it
because not
is.
all people know or not all people prioritize relationships over money.
I
That's
agree. And that's why I think it's so important that we share these things in the FTI because
yeah,
we need to get the word out there that money is not what's going to make you happy. And in
yeah,
fact, loneliness has a worse effect on the health than smoking.
yeah.
So relationships are what let us live a long period of time. They've done studies on centenarians, people who live to 100 and older. They all have lots of healthy relationships. People that don't have lots of healthy relationships pass away much faster. So we got very clear consensus on causing significant unnecessary harm is bad. Before I get to the hands, I want to go to the second definition of fairness that the FTI uses. Let me pull my I'll basically let me describe it. It's basically to increase happiness and decrease harm, but I want to define happiness since it's a very ambiguous term. What we mean by happiness is that you help people achieve whatever goals they have so that they can get the satisfaction and joy that they get from achieving whatever goals they have, as long as those goals don't cause significant unnecessary harm. So, like everything else you want to do, cool. And so help people achieve their goals, minimize the amount of harm that people experience. By the way, when we say harm, harm is something that people opt into. Like I say that I was harmed because this thing happened to me. And then, so it's not that it's a each person gets to define what they consider harm. A masochist doesn't think being hurt is harm, right? They like being hurt, and that's like, all right, cool, do your thing. So basically that's now there's another point is that this is not just like happiness and harm for right now. It's over the entire lifetime of everybody that a decision impacts, with a priority being on the people that you can have the biggest impact on, which actually fits our intuition, where we always feel like we should help the people we have that are the closest to us, right? We feel like we should do the most good for the people that are closest to us. Well, that actually makes logical sense because the people that are closest to us are the ones that we can have the most influence on. And so we can actually have the biggest positive impact in increasing happiness and decreasing harm on the people we can influence the most. Now, that doesn't mean you help only your, nuclear family or your closest friends and screw over everybody else, because then what you're doing is creating more harm than the happiness that you're creating. And what this does is it creates a natural equilibrium and balance. And what I'm going to suggest is that we use I created a chat bot on the FTI six intentions, And so what I'd like to do is anyone that wants to challenge this, give me an ethical decision where you feel like preventing significant unnecessary harm and increasing happiness and decreasing harm is not the right solution. And so give me a specific example. We'll put it into the bot, and then we'll see what it says and whether or not its answer resonates with our critical thinking skills. Anyone want to venture one? You can type it into the chat. Maybe what I'll do is I'll ask people to type those examples into the chat. I will try to pay attention to the chat for a minute, and then I'll let Sean go.
I was just going to ask about the definition of happiness because that was kind of long. It sounded like you were defining happiness not as achieving a goal and avoiding harm, but it was helping people achieve a goal
No,
or
no,
avoid.
it's both. So it's whatever goal anyone has. So let's say you have the goal to travel to Ireland, and your friend has the goal to travel to Ireland. You planning a trip for you and your friend to go to Ireland suddenly helps you both achieve that goal. So now you've created happiness for yourself and for your friend.
Yeah, it could. Yeah. But
So
are you saying
that's what I
that
mean by happiness.
if I
Like you
only
had a
did it,
goal, you achieved that goal, and that achieving the goal is where, the what we define as happiness.
I want to be clear because we're making definitions and these are going to
Sure,
come up,
of course.
we're doing a decision tree, right?
Yep.
Um, if I plan a trip for myself to Ireland, and I'm not planning it for other people, is that not happiness?
It
Or
is
if
happiness. Yeah, it is
okay, so
happiness.
either or. Okay,
Yep.
so
Yep. It can be for
helping other
yourself, for others,
people,
or for both.
helping yourself, got it.
Yep.
And
I
avoiding harm
would,
for others, avoiding harm for yourself.
correct.
Got it.
And what you do is you take all the happiness and all the harm, like when you spend that money on the trip to Ireland, yeah, you enjoy the trip to Ireland, but you're burning cash that you could spend in other areas. And so there are opportunities you're going to cut off for yourself, but opportunities you'll create. And so, like you said, it's a decision tree. And so that's where I'm saying, like, if you're trying, like, what I would encourage everybody to do is to maximize the amount of happiness you create, like, help yourself and other people achieve goals, and minimize the amount of harm that you and other people that you can influence experience, right? Like, what's not to like about that? And if someone thinks that there's a situation where that's not the right answer, I would love for you to put that into the chat and we'll put it into the bot and we'll walk through a logical approach to where that might fit, where that set of rules might fail. The bot will apply those rules to the situation and say, like, here's how the rules would apply to that situation. What we're trying to do is maximize something I call total net present positivity. So if you take all the negativity in your life, all the positivity in your life, and that of everyone you can influence, and there's always a discounting for the future because it's less likely to happen if it's further in the future. And then you say, well, how do I do the most good, right? And what does the most good mean? The most good means helping people achieve their goals and minimizing harm, throughout the lives of the people you can influence. So that's what I would define as good. And I realize that's a bold claim to be able to define good because no one can really define it. Like, I don't think anyone has a good objective definition. I would argue this is a definition grounded in objective, rational thought, not in belief in God, faith in God, or any of that stuff. It's a secular definition of fair that has resonated with all the people I've shared it with and had the conversation about. So, yeah. Ken, go ahead.
One idea that actually and is kind of interesting in taxation is the idea of a progressive consumption tax. So it would work this way. Essentially, the top line of your tax return would be all the money you made. And then the second line would be all the money that you saved. And so by definition, if you take all the money you made and subtract what you saved, that's how much you spent. And the idea that you put a progressive rate on the money that you spent. So you're not penalized, so you're not taxed on how much money you make. You're not taxed on how much money you have, but how much money you spend in every year. And the idea is that you could structure it so that poor people could spend, $30,000 tax free or whatever the number is, right? And then as you spend more and more and more, you pay more and more tax on what you spent. The theory behind this also is somewhat intuitively interesting because the idea is that the cost that you might have for society is really dependent a lot more on what you spend than what you make. If you spend money, then you got more garbage collection, maybe more pollution, right? You have more social costs that then you would pay because you're spending more money. Anyway, I always thought that was an interesting idea. Of course, no one's ever implemented it, but I just tossed that out for discussion.
Well, what about can a wealthy person who decides not to spend much money, they just keep low spending and continue to grow their wealth through passive investment and not really add economic value to society. And then that wealth doesn't get circulated in the economy, slowing down the entire economy because you're basically isolating that wealth to someone who just doesn't want to spend and doesn't want to invest in a way that's going to create more growth.
Well, first of all, I think what you said is economically not necessarily accurate because if I go and take that money and invest it in some way, that's going into government debt. That's going into businesses. Yes, it's
I said
imperfect,
like
but the idea that
stocks.
it's called capital formation,
Yeah.
right? So the people who tend, which is realistically, people like to spend money. So I agree, some people might choose that, but that's probably not going to be something across the system. But the idea that those people would create more capital formation, say, than people who made a lot of money and spent it all.
Well, the idea of buying, like if you buy into an index fund, you're just raising the value of the existing stocks. You're not actually giving the company more money to invest. You're just raising the value of the people who own stocks, which is primarily the wealthy. So economically, I think what I said is perfectly sound, and I am well versed in micro and macroeconomics, and both from a study perspective by famous economists as well as many hours of research. So
So
I realize you
you do
disagree
have the
with me,
difference between
but
IPOs and things that are in the stock market. But you got to remember, if you go and you increase the value of a share and you do it rationally, that is based on the increasing economic output. And then if that company needs more capital, they can access that capital because of the higher stock price.
wait,
So
why do you think that buying an index fund increases the output of a company? That's what you just said, right?
no, okay, let me say it. It's reflective of their improved economic conditions.
Well, not
Ideally, that
necessarily.
you would not buy the share of a company that was going downhill, all everything known. So the idea, so then because of that though, the market capital of that company actually increases, and then it can access the market if necessary in order to create more capital. That's just basic free market capital economics, pretty widely
Yeah,
accepted.
but if someone invests in an index fund, they're not investing in an individual company because of the merits of that company. And we can give many examples of people investing in companies that became worthless very quickly thereafter. So just because someone invests money in a company doesn't mean the company is good, and it doesn't mean that they even chose to invest in that specific company. So your assumptions there are not going to hold all the time.
No, so index funds are essentially a momentum play, and it is a significant amount of the market, but not everyone goes into index funds.
No, I
That's
get
why
it.
a lot of people are actually don't they actually play contra index funds plays. So it's
My
complicated,
my
but
point is that just because someone is investing their money, it doesn't mean that it's adding economic value to society. And a consumption tax primarily is it's a much higher tax on poor people than it is a tax on wealthy people. Wealthy
no.
people do spend more money, but when you have $10 million a year of income, you're not spending commensurately more as a percentage of your income than people who are earning $100,000 a year. You're just not. Like
This is my point.
unless
My
you're like
point is
a totally
you would structure it so poor people would not pay any tax.
a consumption tax,
I said a progressive consumption tax.
how would you even implement that?
Okay, like I said, you could do it quite easily if your tax return was simply how much money you made, how much money you saved, and by definition, the difference is how much you spent. And then you take that amount that you spent and you put it on a progressive scale. And then you put the tax return and you would have to pay the IRS based on how much you spent. So it's not a sales tax, it's a
Right.
progressive consumption tax.
But I guess you still have the same issue where if someone just saves all their money, they keep that money, and if say 50% of very wealthy people just save their money and invest it in passive investments, you end up with that money not circulating in the economy and doing huge, slowing down economic growth of society.
Yeah, and
You
some
keep it
people
in
would say
debt.
that's fair
You
because
keep it in
if
debt.
you're living on $30,000 a year, you pay no tax. It doesn't matter how much you made. If you live on $30,000 a year, you pay the same amount of tax.
It's funny, most conservatives usually want to see the economy grow and to see money invested in creative destruction. It sounds like you don't really believe in the creative destruction concept.
No, I actually think that, I mean, we're doing hypotheticals here, but I
Yeah.
think in reality, the people who may actually make a lot of money tend to spend a lot of money. But if you look about the efficiency of the dollar, I don't think we'd have an issue with money going not being utilized for productive ends. And from an ethical perspective, you would be paying taxes on essentially the social costs of what you spend and not taxing efforts and productivity. So it's actually the opposite. You're not penalizing or taxing people on productivity. You're doing on how much you actually spend and potentially consume social goods.
Well, you're
That was
penalizing
an
people
interesting
on
idea.
consuming social goods, and consuming social goods is the engine of the economy. So you're essentially penalizing economic growth.
Once again, that's hypothetical, and this has never been tried. But I really don't think, once again, the people who make a lot of money will all of a sudden like not be investing it
I
in
mean,
ways.
you're talking about people who switch states, switch countries in order to save a couple percent on tax. If they could spend less and pay less tax, some of them will do it, right? And even if we're talking about, and if we're talking about ultra wealthy people, even if they spend a lot of money by your and our standards, they're still going to be spending a very small percentage of their income because if you're making $10 million a year, you're not spending $10 million a year. You're not consuming as much as you spend. You don't need to. You can live a very luxurious life,
And
just living
absolutely.
on
And some
half
people
or a
say
quarter,
that is a
quarter of that.
fair tax. That's a fair
Well, that
tax.
that's what you believe is a fair tax. I actually put it into the FTI ethical decision bot, and it said that a progressive tax is not inherently fair or unfair. It depends on what happens to it. And so I'm going to ask it a few other follow-up questions. Um, but I want to let Sean go in the meantime, and then I'll come back to you with the conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Garrett. So I wanted to get first an understanding of the underlying assumptions as far as what we're talking about with either a high corporate tax or a wealth tax that we're talking about. Because it sounds like you're coming from a normative position, Garrett, and a practical position. The normative position seems to be that happiness has diminishing returns after you reach a certain amount. So you don't need that extra money anyway. And it's unfair for people to have such a large economic inequality anyway. So taxing them actually brings things fairer or closer together. And the rich people won't really miss it that much because of the scientific articles I think you were referencing, these psychological things.
Hmm.
And the second part that I think you mentioned, or maybe I saw it in the chat, was is it your claim that higher taxes towards the wealthy or corporations generate more revenue for the government to spend on programs and to spend on the deficit?
Say that again.
Do taxes, in your opinion, in your model of the economy, do you see them as what it primarily funds, social programs or paying down the deficit? Do basically by taxing wealthy people more, do we get more whatever program you might want, whether it's,
Well, we get what the administration in power decides to spend the money on, which is where, Frank was saying in the chat, of course I want to avoid taxes. The taxes are going to just, destroying people and killing people in Iran and Palestine. And he's right about that, but the answer to me is not to avoid taxes. It depends on who you elect. If you elect President Trump, what you're doing with your taxes is you're spending that tax money to kill people and to create bombs that destroy economic value. that crush entire civilizations by his words, not mine, or destroy entire civilizations, his words, not mine. That's what you're getting if you're electing that type of representative. But if you elect a representative that wants to help society at large, those taxes can go to social programs that teach people who are
Got it.
unemployable today to actually have a chance at a job that will create
Got it.
economic value and wealth. I won't say that Democrats are doing that today, and I won't say that Republicans are doing that today, but the money could
Sure.
be spent in a variety of ways. But the point is the taxes are not necessarily just because you're taxing someone, we don't know where the taxes are going to just because we decide to tax. Does that make sense?
It does, and it answers my question, which is that you think that taxes generated to the public, whether it's you or me or some wealthy guy or some poor guy, go to fund whatever programs, whether it's the military, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's whatever. That's the way programs are funded. Um,
I mean, do you
I,
disagree with
I
that?
I do.
Where
I
do you think
actually
taxes go but to the government who decides how to spend the budget?
I think taxes, when we pay them, are essentially deleted from the system. Um, I follow, if you've heard of modern monetary theory, which is put out there by Stephanie Kelton, who was Bernie Sanders' chief economic advisor, and Warren Mosler. Essentially, the way the federal government, the way money gets generated, is it's issued by the federal government first, and then spent second. So whenever there's a big program that needs a lot of money, needs a lot of funding or anything, they issue money into the current economic environment, and usually to offset for inflation. Because if you have too much money circulating in the economy all at once, especially liquid money that people are spending a lot, they typically will issue corresponding value of bonds so that people will buy up the bonds like a 10-year bond and soak up that spending power.
Sorry to
So when
interrupt you.
you
Can you
when you
say
send
the
taxes,
name again?
let me just explain what I
Well,
mean by the
I just want the
taxes.
name so I can research it while you're talking.
Modern monetary theory,
Okay.
and the people you can look up is Stephanie Kelton and Warren Mosler. And what they say, the way taxes work, essentially, taxes are a way to control inflation, to keep inflation from going out of control. They control the amount of purchasing power and spending power that you have. So if because if the inflation is really high, that means people have too much money and they're spending too much money. So they tax the money back and they essentially delete it. They basically throw money in the furnace. So taxing wealthy people a ton it won't necessarily fund the programs that you want. You can fund those programs all by yourself without having to do that. But if your claim is that we should tax wealthy people just for moral reasons, because it seems more fair, or because they don't really need that money and we're doing it for their own psychological well-being, that's a different argument. But if the claim is that we need their money to do the programs we need, that doesn't really hold, and that's specifically with our economy, because our economy, the U.S. dollar, is the global reserve currency. We can never run out of money.
It's
We can
not
So
going
never
to be
go
the global
bankrupt.
not going to be the global reserve currency for much longer, Sean. I hate to tell you. And
Well, I know
when
you're
we
probably
lose it,
pointing to probably pointing to BRICS and things like that, which is it's an important thing that BRICS doesn't come to be.
well, BRICS is going to come to be whether you like it or not, whether anyone likes it or not. And the U.S. is losing its like the U.S. has lost its closest trade partners, Mexico and Canada, because of Trump. So we are losing economic stature across the world, where our economy is being crushed, and we are going to lose reserve currency because of these moves. All of our allies that have lots of USD, like they're not going to want to hold USD that much more. As soon as there's a good alternative, and China's probably going to try to create a good alternative at some point, and
Hmm.
BRICS in general will try to create a good alternative at some point. And as soon as there is one, people are going to switch to that because the US is no longer stable. We're not a state, we
Okay.
don't have a stable government anymore. We had a coup attempt.
Garrett, haven't you noticed though that we're messing with all the countries who are in the BRICS alliance, right? China, Iran, Venezuela. I mean, we haven't messed too much with Brazil or South Africa or India, but
Or China,
we're making a lot of efforts to
Brazil, India, China,
Mhm.
uh, and
Iran. South Africa. There's a few others that have joined that are outside the acronym, but
So are you
their
saying
goal
that
is
we're going to
to.
bully our way to like preventing BRICS from ever getting power by attacking all of the BRICS countries?
I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying that it's not as inevitable a thing as you might be pointing to.
Hey,
Right,
Sean, can I ask you a
right,
question?
Garrett. There's no economic crash coming as people exit the dollar. I agree with Sean entirely on the MMT theory, and that it with a minimum, it says experts are saying it would take at least 5 years or longer, maybe even decades, for the U.S. dollar to be replaced because we're the world's reserve currency and the
Mhm.
petrodollar and
I
the
didn't, yeah,
and so but the idea that we're doomed and that there's going to be a sudden crash, I agree it's a bad situation, but
I didn't
it
say
would
we're
take
doomed, and I didn't say it's going to happen in the next 5 years, and I
okay,
don't think it is. But I
uh,
do think that we're headed in that direction, and that we can't take for granted that our currency will always be super valuable. And when we lose reserve currency, there's going to be massive amounts of inflation for the US dollar,
That's true.
and we need to be ready for that. And this whole MMT, look, Sean, you know I love Bernie
well,
Sanders,
let
right?
me finish. Let me finish
Oh, I'm
one
sorry,
thing.
Don, I thought you were done
There's the U.S. Treasuries are a major world investment around the world,
right now.
and there is no other country right now. Even Germany, is too small to absorb all the money that's put into the U.S. Treasury built by China, Japan, and or, other countries. So it's still going to be a very long, slow process if the dollar ever gets replaced, and I don't think it will be.
So,
Well, and my
I'm
concern,
curious
Can I
what you
ask
guys
Sean a
if
think.
question?
hang
I have
on,
a
just
burning question for Sean.
well, 1 second, Ken. I
Okay.
know probably where you're going to ask me. I'm sure all my libertarian friends and comrades on here are probably, their hair's on fire right now. But
Sean, I have a
my
question.
concern
Oh,
with the what you're proposing, Garrett, is I think if you did a massive wealth tax and you flooded the market with a ton of liquid capital, what it would cause is a massive amount of inflation.
then you would make middle class people pay less. I mean, doesn't that make sense? If you
The
can
prices
tax the
would,
rich more, and then if you need a certain amount of money to do certain programs, um, it's got to
well,
come from somewhere. So if you're giving tax breaks to wealthy people and
yeah.
wealthy corporations, then the money is coming from the middle class.
Well, everyone's getting taxed.
What about subsidies? Why are we giving $30 billion a year to oil companies? So that we get charged more for gas.
Well, because the money, it's not a zero sum game. It's not like there's a limited amount of currency, and giving money to the oil companies means it's being taken out of your pocket, right? This isn't a
Well, it
game
must
of
be because
this isn't
if
Robin Hood.
we need to run the country, we need a certain amount of money, and if they're not paying their fair share, then we are paying it.
When you say
Garrett,
that's where you're
Garrett,
wrong, Jennifer.
we
It
having
doesn't work
hands
that way.
raised?
Hang
We
on
are
one
going to
second,
get to
Sonny.
hands, but we're on a
Well,
specific
can you
topic, so
explain to
we
me
will get to
why?
more
Yeah,
hands.
Can
yes,
you explain to
because
me
it's
why?
not this isn't like the gold standard where there's a limited amount of gold and we have to share it around different people and certain people are hoarding gold and it's causing everybody else to not have enough gold. There's no limit to the US dollar as far as that
Yes,
goes.
I
This
understand that.
this is not
When you
Rob, this
say
is not a
this,
game. Hang on one, I'll give you an analogy that makes it really clear. I think what most people think of this as is Robin Hood, right? Robin Hood steals from the rich and he gives to the poor, right? This would be Robin Hood stealing from the rich and throwing the money into a bonfire. Okay.
no. So I think that's a completely unrealistic analogy. And actually, MMT, look, I love Bernie Sanders, but the one thing the guy doesn't understand is economics. So trying to give credit to his economic advisor for being a part of this theory is actually detriment to like Bernie doesn't understand basic economics. Like I love the guy, I like a lot of his policies, but MMT doesn't understand basic economics either. So basically, if you print off, let's say we printed off 10, why don't we just print off all the money to pay off all our debt? Why don't we do that, Sean?
Because you wouldn't want to pay the debt.
No, I'm just
Well,
asking
you
like
mean the debt or the deficit?
the deficit, the debt,
The deficit
the
is
debt, the
is the
debt,
money supply.
the debt.
Deficit is
Just
the money
why
supply.
not just eliminate our debt? Just pay it all off, print off all the money. What
You wouldn't
happens? What happened to all the countries that did
every
that 100%?
So I have an answer for you. Every time we have had a surplus, we get a depression. Yeah, when it happened in with Clinton, we had the dot-com bust. When it happened at the end of 2008,
You're
we
not
had the
answering my
depression.
question.
Yep,
No,
surpluses are always followed by recessions.
every country in history that has paid off its debt by printing fiat non-backed currency, what has happened to them?
Are we every country in the world, or are we the global reserve currency?
There have been prior global reserve currency countries in the world, I'm sure, that have done it. I can look it up.
The Dutch were before, and it's been like a couple hundred years. Or I think the British were right before us. You can
But
look up Ray
but
Dalio talks about this.
name what happened, Sean. What happened to every country that tried to pay off its debt by printing money?
You tell
I'll
me.
name it. I'll do it.
Go
Hey,
ahead.
if the countries that failed by printing money were printing money in their own currency to pay off a debt that was in another country's currency,
Correct.
that's how you fail. And I'm sure Sean would agree with that. If you have debt in your own currency,
Mm-hmm.
it's a different story because, by the way, every the government would be the Federal Reserve would be malpractice would be if it did not print money and put it into the economy. Our economy grows like 2% a year or something, and that's millions, billions of dollars.
3% is the average since more or less the country's founding.
And the Federal Reserve needs to print that money to pay off to.
No one's suggesting otherwise, Don. The point is whether or not we can create limitless amounts of debt. The question is, can we create limitless amounts of debt and never have a problem? Every country that had too high of a debt to income ratio has printed off currency ended up with hyperinflation. And I have a friend that lived in one of those countries, the Soviet Union, when it happened, and literally people had to bring wheelbarrows of cash to the grocery store to buy their groceries. That was the type of situation. And everybody's income was completely unpredictable because whatever you made 3 months later, it was worthless because the hyperinflation just kept the amount of that currency was worth just became worthless. 3 months later, what you made 3 months ago was worthless. So there was no savings. If you're worried about people not saving, hyperinflation is the best way to stop anyone from saving. You're just going to spend what you have today because you have it today, because it's going to be worthless tomorrow no matter what. So hyperinflation is what MMT creates. It's like, absolutely ridiculous economic quote unquote theory.
Does not, because you're assuming that there's going to be more expense than the goods provided by that to buy with that expense. Right now, our economy is not running at full capacity. And the way the federal government creates prosperity is by buying things. This is MMT, buying things, and that money goes out to, for instance, right now it's military, but the military contractors make money. They pay their workers. The workers, it cycles around. The workers buy. It creates a form of prosperity. It's a warped kind of prosperity by the government printing money and buying for the military. It should be, I think, printing money and getting college education for the kids that
Correct.
make us stronger. But the idea that there's not enough stuff to buy, it's all.
No one's saying that there's not enough stuff to buy, Don. I'm saying that if you print off more money, you create inflation. And the more money you print, the more inflation
No,
you
the
create.
money
That's
does
why,
not create.
just let me
You're talking
finish,
about.
Don. We said we're not going to interrupt each other. And I didn't
He's
mean to
partly
interrupt you
right.
earlier. I
You're partly
apologize
right
that
there.
I did. So my point is that, see, I lost my point, and this is why we don't interrupt each other. So go ahead, Don.
You're talking
Congrats.
about price inflation. If things costing more, taking more and more dollars or whatever it is to buy something. But price inflation can only occur whenever there is too much money chasing too few goods from printing. But that's not what the U.S. government does. We've managed our economy quite well since we went off the gold standard, compared to Wall Street, who has crashed the economy at least 4 times in my lifetime through their capitalist exploits and us having to bail them out. But as long as there's, say, a factory that's running at 80% capacity and the U.S. government wants to print some money and get them rolling up to 90% or even 100%, that is prosperity. That creates jobs. That creates a prosperous factory. As soon as that factory they start buying goes over, now you don't have enough stuff. You've got too much money chasing too few goods, and that will cause inflation. But MMT says as long as we have reserve capacity in our economy, we can spend into it and create prosperity. And that is actually how the economy works.
No, the MMT is highly controversial. The whole concept that you can have limitless amounts of spending is highly controversial and not backed by any existing scenario in history.
I just
Name any country that had nine times not like nine like 100 times as much debt as income. Name
Please,
one.
please listen. You said limitless spending, and I said no. You spend up to where the economy has the reserve capacity to absorb that spending and create jobs and create prosperity and create more goods and services for
Okay,
people.
so how do you
So it's
decide?
not limitless. It's limited by the the availability of goods and
Resources.
services to buy. The
So
resource.
how do you decide what the limit is to how much currency you can have in circulation?
Well, this goes into do you trust the government or not? And I say, hey, it's capitalism that has crashed the economy the last 4 times in my lifetime, not the U.S. government. We're doing a pretty good job of management. So you have to trust some management. And the Federal Reserve has not done a terrible job. I'm not saying perfect, but they haven't done a terrible job of managing the money supply. So you've got to, if you trust your government or not, that's a more of a situation that we get into with these extreme right-wing people who you think government's too big and you can't trust it. It's a terrible thing. It's spinning us into oblivion. Blah blah blah. I don't believe that.
Garrett,
Well,
and
I
you're
mean, it
partially
depends
right.
who's running the government.
Garrett, let me agree with you for a part of this. You're
Sure.
partially right in that you can't just print into oblivion, and you can't, Don's right in that like resources are part of the constraint. You can't just say I'm going to buy 100 million tanks because like you're limited by the resources, the capacity of your own manufacturing, your labor force, the actual resources you have. But the other way, you also don't want to flood the market with too much money, which is why they issue bonds in corresponding amounts to sop up that. You also, if people have their money baked into areas, like if you said, like you took all your money and you put it on your mattress or whatever, and you're not spending it, that's sopped up. That's not circulating in the economy and
Right.
creating inflation. So you want concentrations of wealth in that way versus somebody who's spending like a drunken sailor going everywhere. That's going to cause massive inflation. That's also why the Federal Reserve has the interest rates because they want to limit people's spending. If they want, okay, the interest rate's 7%, people are buying less houses, people are less, they're more thrifty. And that's the same reason that what the taxes do is the taxes are a way to create some level of wealth destruction and limits on spending. So
Let's go to
it's
the next
yeah,
hand if we
sure.
could. Go ahead, Sonny, if he's still with us.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot of things you guys talked about which kind of went over my head. But I was trying to figure out some individuals. If I'm wrong in my assessment, please let me know. Some individuals were not happy that the rich should pay more in their fair share in taxes. Was that right? That's the impression I got, Garrett. Is that true?
No one said they were happy that the rich should pay more than their fair share. Some of us did say that the rich have the capacity to pay, and the rich should pay the majority of the taxes because the
Mm-hmm.
rich have the majority of the economic wealth,
Mm-hmm.
and they can pay higher taxes without significantly reducing their harm or their
Okay.
happiness.
Okay. Yeah, and I heard somebody say that, if a person is making 30,000, they don't pay any taxes, so they should be happy. And that kind of triggered something in me. I saw this particular confrontation between a senator and a CEO of Boeing, I believe, where basically he got criticized for receiving a 32.8 million compensation package which is a 45% increase from the previous year when the people, the workers, they got no raise for many years. So, the whole idea of Sean saying that, you know what, taxing the rich to fund the welfare programs, forget heck with the welfare program. How about making sure that the guy who gets 30,000 will get at least 60,000? That's an area we need to focus on too. It's not just we are taxing the rich so that we can fund the welfare programs. That is good, that's important, but that's not the main problem because you have people, the rich becoming richer and the poor are getting poorer. That's a major problem.
Are the poor getting poorer, or are they just not increasing wealth as fast as the rich
They
increase
are
theirs?
getting poorer. I can show you the Pew Economic Center's graph of this.
And the middle class is shrinking too.
Look at the World Economic Forum. What you said is empirically false.
What's that?
If you look at since about the 2000s, going back in time, the number of poor in the world has decreased over time. We have
We're not
almost
talking about the
fewer
world. We're talking
poor
about the
across
US.
the world now than we've ever had.
Yeah, we're not talking about the world. We're talking about the US. Poverty around the world is dropping, but socioeconomic disparity is widening, even
Why?
globally.
Yeah, why is anybody not addressing this whole $32 million package? Just avoiding that totally? Talk about that.
What was that again, Sonny? The $32 million package for whom?
The big beautiful bill? Is that what he's talking about?
That was a lot more than $32 million. Sonny,
Gary, here's a question for you. I was posed this one in graduate school, and it kind of divided the class a little bit. It's a hypothetical, it's a philosophical question. If you could have say, a tax program that lifted people out of poverty, so we would have fewer people in poverty if you did this program, but it increased disparity. You had more rich people at the end than you did. So you had a greater spread between the wealthy and the poor, but you had fewer poor. Would that be an ethical program?
I think it
well,
would.
the
You're
question
raising
is, what are your alternatives, right? You have to say more ethical than what? I would argue if you could have a program that had sure, plenty of millionaires and billionaires, but everybody made $100,000 USD a year in an average US town, cost adjusted for geographic area. I would argue that's more ethical than what you just proposed. I would argue what you proposed is more ethical than having lots of people in poverty. I have no
I
problem
think
with wealthy people being wealthy. We do very well, right? But like,
no,
I
but
do have a problem. I do
so
have a problem with people who don't feel like wealthy people should be paying their fair share of tax and saying that poor people should be condemned to starve to death or beg for money because they grew up in bad circumstances.
agree. But it's funny because we've had two different conversations going on here. Because
Mhm.
sometimes we're talking about taking people out of poverty, but then Sunny and some others have talked about income disparity. And I think what
Right.
this philosophical question proposes is that these two can be two very distinct conversations. And the question is, which one do you think is important? Is income disparity? I mean, if we were all above the poverty line, but we had some really rich people, is that even a problem? It depends what your ethical compass is and
I
what you
think
think the issue is.
as long as everybody is making enough money, and I'm curious if people agree with this, I would argue as long as everybody is making enough money, that more money isn't significantly increasing happiness, which is about $100,000 USD a year in an average US town. As long as everyone's doing that, I don't have a problem with socioeconomic disparity. In purchasing power parity. I have no problem with socioeconomic disparity after that point. But someone should be able to be a musician and live a life where they're not worried about paying for food and like feeding themselves and their kids and choosing between food and medicine. Like no one should be in that situation in the wealthiest country in the world. So that's why one of the FTI's five ambitious goals is to create a world in which everybody on earth makes that kind of money, which is not possible today. But I would bet with AI and robotics that 50 years from now, we will be in that situation. The question is whether or not we will have a situation where, and I'm going to show you the Pew Center Trust that shows that the poor are getting poorer. This is the upper income, which I think is the top 10%. Yep, it's the
Hmm.
top 10%. Went from 29% of total wealth to over 48% of wealth. The lower income folks went from 10% to 8% of total wealth, and the middle class went from 62% to 43%. So literally, everyone is getting poor other than the
Eric,
upper
that's not
income
what you
folks.
said. Okay, the graph you showed does not comport with what you said.
Why do you think
If you
that?
look at that, because if you look at the graph, it's actually the total U.S. income, the total U.S. GDP income, and the U.S. has gotten much wealthier. So just because the percentage of the lower people has gone down relative to everyone else doesn't mean the bottom people have gotten poorer. They've probably gotten richer.
It's
Okay.
percentage. It's
It's
not
Let's,
percentage.
amount.
I hear you. I'll do a little more research for you, Ken.
Well,
Well,
we
I've got
really don't have to take time for this one question.
No, I think it's important. Like, I
no,
mean,
no. I hear what
it's
you're
not
saying.
the only
Well,
one, but it's worth
let me put a
researching.
practical let me put a practical point on, I think, your thought experiment, Ken. The Congressional Budget Office has said that when you have high corporate tax rates, and I assume this would be similar to like a wealth tax rate, just on high net income people, the workers of the businesses that those people employ typically take a 25% hit of whatever you levy on them due to lowered wages. That comes from our own government. And there's other private analyst groups that put that all the way up to 50% at some times. So to your point, Ken, you might have a situation whereby by doing a massive wealth tax, you will actually lower the income of people below as well. So is that worth it to hurt not hurt, because like you're saying, Garrett, they're still going to be rich, right? They're still going to have a level of happiness, right? But by taxing a lot of their excess wealth, is it worthwhile to do that if you're hurting the middle class or the poor?
Why do you
I
think it
would
would
say
hurt the
no,
middle class or the poor? I don't follow
because
that logic.
the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, cites this. They say that when you do this, when you do high taxes on corporations, it's a consistent trend that 25% of the workers, the labor force, will be hit by whatever you tax them with.
Can
Well, it
you
sounds
can you
like they're
cite a
being
source for that that's
Yeah,
not
sure.
from the Trump administration?
Yeah, that's fine.
it sounds like they're just being greedy that, well, if you're going to take more money away from us, we're going to pay less to the employees. Why do the
That may be
CEOs
true.
get,
That's
Yeah.
probably true.
5% increase?
That,
It's
that's
just greed.
probably true. Well, it's greed, but it's also amount of resources that
They're
go
entitled, they
around. Like
feel entitled.
they're not going to take a haircut and not have it go downstream with their entire organization.
Meaning they
Well,
won't
quick
let their
question for you.
profitability fall in order to pay their employees well.
That's just the facts of the way it works.
No,
But
that's
I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's what
that's
Well,
happens.
that's
right. There has to be some kind of regulation about like in Germany, like what they can make in relation to the employees.
where the top
But
income earners are limited in their income from the bottom income earners, which is an interesting solution.
Right. I'm not saying they should take everything away from them. I'm just saying it should be
It,
more fair.
it is quite
And
disappointing. It's
they're
quite
not
disappointing when somebody says, that's the way it is.
Right. Well, it is like Sean is being pragmatic. He's like, this is how it happened. I get where he's coming from, but I also think it's important to remember that if we all lived our lives with this is how it's always been, so let's not make it better, then we would still have slavery. We would not have refrigerators. We wouldn't have technology. No one would invent anything new. No one would create new, better processes, procedures, inventions. So saying this is how it is, and so we're stuck with this forever, I don't think that's what you mean, Sean, but it can come across that way.
Well, it's not just that, because if I'm correct about that MMT is an what take the morals out of it. If it's an accurate depiction of the way our economy works, I'm not saying it should work this way. I'm not saying it's printing money forever is the best thing, but if it's an accurate depiction of it and taxes don't go to fund the big federal programs you're talking about, taxing the wealthy doesn't have any positive impact on raising the poor or the middle class. It actually potentially hurts them.
I don't know why do you think that? Like I don't see where you're coming from. If you tax wealthy
I'll
people,
pass the.
it's
Mhm.
been shown time and again, and it's the way that it's run in all the Scandinavian countries, high top tax income rate, and there are more social services, there's a much smaller percentage of the population that's poor, there's healthcare for everybody, all these great benefits for all of society. And the wealthy say, you know what, we're happy to pay our fair share of tax because we know that it creates a more fair society. And so this has
He's
been
pointing to
proven time and
Scandinavia.
again economically. I
You,
I
you
hear what
can't
you're
compare.
saying. I just let me finish. I hear what you're saying, and I
Mhm.
hear it repeated in conservative circles over and over again. And you may well have heard it in conservative circles so much that you believe it's true, but I want to hear why you think it's true.
I don't think
Okay,
it's true.
Stephanie Kelton and Warren Mosler are not conservative economists at all by
If you're
any
talking
measure.
about MMT, it doesn't say what you just said from what I read of it. It doesn't say
That
that
that ta- that, ta- that taxes don't go to fund social programs.
no, that that taxing the wealthy won't help the poor. If you ask Bernie Sanders whether or not we should increase the tax on the wealthy, what does he say?
How would taxing the wealthy help the poor if the taxes don't go to fund social programs or to redistribute in any way?
So let's put it very simply. Let's say we
It,
raise the taxes
at best, it
by
would just shrink the difference between them.
let's say we raise taxes by $1 trillion a year
Okay.
by taxing the wealthy. So the government budget is now
So
$1 trillion larger, right?
the government budget, you again are assuming that when you tax $1 trillion, that's going into a money bin and that's going to be distributed to as the government sees fit.
Where do
I'm
you think
saying
our
that
tax dollars
$1 trillion is being
go?
thrown into a volcano.
Where do you think our tax dollars go? When you pay taxes at the end of the year, where do you think it goes? When you
Can
They
send
I
a
jump?
delete
check,
them
when
from
you
the
send a
ledger.
check to the IRS, where do you think it goes? Does it just
Can I?
disappear
They
from the
delete it from
computer
the
screen?
ledger. It's like when you buy a movie ticket.
No,
When
they
the
don't
movie
delete it from
theater
the ledger,
issued you a
Sean. Try
movie theater
again.
ticket.
They don't delete it from the ledger. Try again.
I think you're just I think you're just operating on an you're looking at other foreign governments who don't have a reserve currency and don't have a floating interest rate. When you compare Scandinavia, it's apples to oranges.
Where do you think the money goes? Why do you think it gets deleted from a ledger? Like, what makes you think that?
Because economists look, you can if you want, I can post a bunch of sources in here. Uh, the tax money is used to sop up spending power. It is not used to fund stuff. Now, maybe at a state level or a city level, you might have some level of funding the roads or whatever, but on a federal level, it is simply used to control inflation.
You
Can
know,
we
the
all
un
can we all agree that federal spending is completely disconnected to tax revenue?
That's
No,
what I would say.
no, I can't agree with that.
Because we will spend trillions in debt during COVID and not change taxes. We'll go to war with Iraq and not raise taxes. We'll just pull the money out of the system through debt, and it's completely disconnected from tax policy. Republicans are famous for lowering taxes and creating new federal programs and going to war. And Democrats, to their credit, at least they used to, they funded Obamacare. They tried to fund it with a tax. Comes along and gets rid of the tax, but nothing changes about Obamacare. So I think it's completely disconnected. Federal spending is completely disconnected from tax revenue.
It's not that they're completely disconnected. It's that people in power can, choose to have bigger deficits, and our government has been approving getting a bigger and bigger deficit over time. But if you look at it, the reason our deficit is getting bigger is because, and the reason that our debt is getting bigger is because we're taxing less and spending more. And that has been primarily Republicans taxing less and spending more. You have the tax and spend Democrats, and then you have the don't tax and spend more Republicans. Those are the two parties we have, and those are right now our only two choices, although I hope that will change with time. But, the very fact that the deficit has been going up, says Sean that what you're saying isn't accurate because if taxing doesn't change the debt or the deficit, why is it that decreasing taxes increased our deficit?
The deficit is the money supply that's in the market right now. That's
What?
what it represents.
No,
Yes, it
no.
is the amount of money that the federal government has issued and is in the market. When the money is taxed, that money is deleted from the ledger. And when they need more money, they go to the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and they ask for more money. Congress controls the purse, and they have to, pass laws. They have to say, formally request money. They will issue the money. They typically will issue bonds to some degree to offset the amount that's being issued, and then it's spent on whatever program that Congress approves.
And
But
Sean, you're right. That's how central banks work.
Yes.
But that is the amount of money that the government is inserting into the economy at a point in time. It's not the amount of money in circulation. Those are totally separate things.
The deficit is the amount of money in
No,
circulation.
it's not.
I invite you to look that up.
And the fractional reserve system's set up that way. The Fed is actually loaning money.
Yeah.
The
And I
government
think this,
puts
and I
money
think this
into
is
the
why
economy
it's so
by
easy. I think this is why it's so easy to think that, the wealthy need to pay their fair share. That, if only they would give up their billions of dollars, we could fund, free college for all or health care for
Okay.
all.
So this is the difference between the deficit and the money in circulation. The deficit is the amount of money that the government spends this year, the extra money the government spends this year. So the government is spending that much more in one single year. The money in circulation is the total amount of money, cash and bank deposits that exists at this moment in time. They are two completely separate and highly disconnected things. The deficit is changing the money in circulation year after year, but the money in circulation is a much bigger number than the deficit.
So Garrett, go down to the next paragraph.
It can
there,
affect money in
you
circulation, but
know,
only indirectly.
there's two kinds of deficits.
I'll go back.
There's the trade deficit where we actually are buying more goods from foreign countries than we are producing and selling to foreign countries. That's trade deficit. Then there's the deficit of how much we tax versus how much we spend. And when we don't tax as much as we spend, that becomes the deficit that MMT describes.
That's right.
And the MMT has been saying we've been doing this for decades and we have not crashed the economy doing it because it's been spent pretty wisely in buying goods and services that were not that were available to be bought, and that's what created jobs. That's what created corporate growth. That kind of thing, which creates prosperity. I really got to say, my hat's off to Sean trying to explain MMT because I have tried to explain it several times, and it's very difficult to explain. One way of looking at it is a balance sheet. On the left side, on the right side, you have two different things. You have the government,
Don, we lost you.
or something like that. No, it goes into the economy, and the other side of the balance sheet is all the goods and services. More products, more nursing or whatever services are available, teaching, whatever that we prosper by having. And if you believe that when economy grows, that the U.S. government has to print money to support that growth, to keep price levels even. If the government, like we talked about, spent way too much money, pumping it in more than the economic growth, then you would have too much money chasing too few goods. If the government did not spend enough money that the economy was growing by, we would have the opposite. You would have price deflation, which is what everyone fears because it's a spiral to the bottom. But we haven't done those things yet. MMT has said we've been doing this for decades since we went off the gold standard, and it's only Wall Street that's crashed the economy, not the Federal Reserve, not the Congress and their spending.
And Garrett, I think you'll like that one of the only big policies of MMT is job guarantees. They would rather pay people to be employed than pay them to be unemployed. And so it's very similar to the civilian conservation corps that FDR had, where if we have a lot of people who are unemployed, and the government will print money and find valuable things for them to do, whether it's build the expressways or bridges or big public works programs and stuff like that. We're not limited by, oh, we didn't, Elon is hoarding all the wealth and therefore we can't do anything with it.
And Garrett, to go back to your comment, because the thing is important. When you said about, oh, if we get robots that will be able to give everyone $100,000 a year, that's not good. Because there's increasingly research in the area of artificial intelligence that if you just gave everyone $100,000 a year, they're not going to be happy. They're going to be sitting on their bed doom scrolling the internet.
So
So this comes back to,
that's not what I you're not saying what I said. And by the way, I looked into this idea that the money supply increases because of MMT, but actually there's a much better explanation which I gave at a prior event. And by the way, I think people should be working for the $100,000 a year. I don't think they should be sitting at home and doom scrolling. I don't think everyone should just get $100,000 a year. I think we should all be able to pursue whatever passion we want, meaning someone should be able to be a dancer and make $100,000 a year. Someone should be able to be a musician and make $100,000 a year. Recently, Ireland basically gave stipends to musicians, so they got paid, I think it was like 3,000 euros a month in order to play music publicly. And they found that it actually added more value to the economy than it cost the government in spending. And so there was a net positive increase in productivity. And so what I'd like to see is when we get into a situation where there's huge amounts of productivity in a very small, where there is huge amounts of economic wealth, that wealth gets shared with everybody, not given out. And that's why I don't believe in universal basic income. I think it should be earned and worked for. But the reason that I think we haven't found inflation is because the money that has been being put into the economy is going to the wealthy, and that's a common theory. MMT is a fringe theory, not a common, and it's highly contested. And the idea that the money that has been put into the supply has been going to the wealthy who don't buy more rice and beans because they got more money, so it doesn't affect CPI in a significant way. That's a better explanation for why tripling the money supply since 2008 hasn't caused inflation.
okay, but Garrett, here's the question.
Just because something's contested doesn't mean it's not an accurate
Oh, I
description of
agree
the way
with
the
you.
world
I
works.
present lots of contested stuff. I just logically defend them. MMT, we've already had the people who agree with it say it's extremely hard to explain to someone. I don't know. Like it doesn't make sense to me when you say something like when you pay taxes, the tax money disappears. No, it goes into the government's set of funds, and those funds get used to create a deficit or a surplus. And so those mon funds
So
actually are used in determining how much money, they should be used in determining how much money the government should be spending. The problem is that our politicians have started to think they can go on a spending spree without any repercussions, and MMT seems to be supporting that. Like I get where it's coming from in that I think that increasing money supply in a responsible way and giving it to the right
yep,
people can be done without
sure.
inflation. I agree with that. But it can also be done
Yep,
in an irresponsible way, which has been done since 2008. And so,
agreed.
that's why it hasn't increased money supply, not because of MMT, but because the money has been going to people who don't spend more.
Yeah, there's
We
mechanisms
will
that
do it
have to
after
be
that.
taken into
Go bring it
account to
here.
make
Go bring
sure
it
that
here.
inflation doesn't spiral out. The deficit isn't the big monster. The big monster is inflation that you need to be fighting in this. And to what you were saying before about like, the FTI's intentions is to create a world in which, a singer or a dancer can earn, a good enough for a happy life as you've defined it. Um, I'm not sure why you're against something like universal basic income, because that would provide for that, and you could still encourage that you're doing something. But if you're a crappy dancer or a crappy singer, like you might not make that much money if people don't really go to your recitals or buy your albums. Like,
No,
what are you going to do then?
I think there should be a guaranteed minimum equivalent of $100,000 in an average US city. Even if you're a crappy dancer, if that's what you want to do, go for it. But you should be spending some of your
You have to
time
work.
towards something that
Okay.
adds value to society. I'm not a free market laissez-faire,
Okay.
let people fall where they may, and if you suck, then you're a loser and you don't make any money and you can be poor, goddamn you. Like I'm not one of those
Yeah.
people.
Got it.
So the
But you're
question is, if
you're
I'm
saying
a
as long as
really
you work.
crappy,
As
sorry,
long as you work, as long as you do something productive for society. I actually think that people should be able to be philosophers, right? Someone should be able to
Sure.
be a wisdom, a purveyor of wisdom that's not religious, right? And
Right.
like that used to exist in ancient Greece and Rome. I think that would be cool. I think there should be more people sharing wisdom. I'd love to see people get paid for that. I would sign up
right,
Diogenes.
first for the job. So
Diogenes should get paid for living in the
not
barrel.
Diogenes, please.
yeah. But Garrett, like, let's say I want to sing, but I'm a really crappy singer, and no one wants to show up and hear me sing, even for $1. I don't think that's really doing much for society, but it's doing something for me because I really want to sing. So why should the government go and tax Sean to give me my $100,000 a year for something that does nothing for society because it's only doing something for me?
Ken,
Again,
have you
again, Ken,
chosen
because the taxes aren't paying for me,
how
right?
many people, Ken, do you know that have pursued with vim and vigor something that they suck at and that other people have told them they're not very good at and they continue to do it anyway?
I, I know a lot of artists.
And you think they suck as artists?
Some do. Some are great, but some really should have, taken a day job or given up the dream at some point. I mean, Garrett, I'm sure you know some people who are like, you know what, it's awesome that they have a hobby and they really try hard at it, but like if you were to really be honest from your heart of hearts, you'd be like, yeah, it's not that great.
I actually don't know people that I would say like for the things that they're passionate about that they absolutely suck at it. They've been told they suck at it and they want to continue doing it anyway. I don't see that. Like that's
We,
not
we
we have
maybe
different
maybe
circles,
my
I
circles
guess.
have more sucky people. I don't know. Maybe
No,
that.
it's not that you have more sucky people. Maybe we have different impressions of what sucks and what doesn't.
Sure.
Like Van Gogh wasn't popular during his time. Like he was
True.
considered like he was absolute poverty, right? He
Hmm.
wasn't appreciated until after he died. And a
Hmm.
lot of people may not be. And, I think, ultimately like people respond to peer pressure of positivity and negativity. If someone is doing something and they get a lot of negativity for what they're doing, if I, for example, tried to sing for a living, which I would never do, I wouldn't expose anyone to my singing if I didn't know them really well or I wasn't really drunk.
Hmm.
So, um, like, like if I tried to make a living singing, people would criticize my singing politely, but enough that I would get the hint and I would switch. And I think almost everybody would do that. And for the 0.01% of people that won't, I'll take the hit.
But don't they stop singing because they need to make money, right? So, no one's going to show up and pay for my tickets, and I need to make money. And so then I've run out of time to sing because I'm driving my Uber or working as a barista or something, right? But what if the government or your rich uncle just gave you money? You could sing all you want, and you didn't have to worry about money.
And
Maybe you
that's
would
why
just
I asked you,
continue
Ken,
doing
how
it,
many
right?
people you know that do that?
Well, no, because most people, no one I know
I
is or free
I
of
know
financial
one. Well, I guess I
constraints.
do know one. I know Donald Trump starts one business after another. He's a terrible businessman and he keeps doing it. But his most successful business was running for government. He's made $1.5 trillion by getting gold bars and a gold watch in order to turn lower tariffs. So, all right,
You know
he
one.
became
You
good at
know one.
something. I know
You
one.
know
I know
one at
one.
least.
I do know
There
one.
you go.
Yeah.
Um,
But he
w-
inherited a
eh,
huge amount of money and that's why, like for him like it doesn't matter.
well, Garrett, there's a practical consideration in that if everyone is funded to pursue their hobbies or dreams, you know, no one's dream is probably to be the best garbage man in the world. Maybe there's some, but or the best barista. There will be some who really like it. Maybe they like the social thing. Maybe they like the, whatever it is. They're really passionate about coffee. But for society to operate or for you to have bigger projects that improve your community, improve civilization, improve whatever. You need people who are willing to do the work that they might not necessarily do otherwise because they're getting paid, you
Right now
know?
you do, but if you have robots that can do almost everything a human
Right.
can do, you
True.
don't.
True. Let's see. Fingers crossed for
10,
Terminator.
10 years from now. No, I mean, like, this is a very real situation. Like, people aren't looking at robotics. I watch AI and robotics every week. Every day I'm reading the news on AI and robotics. And I'll tell you, China's way ahead of us on robotics because they're investing in it as a government. Is our government investing in robotics? Our government's in on AI right now, theoretically, but not really on robotics. They're not thinking about robotics. And China has robots that can trudge through Arctic temperatures for huge long amounts of miles, which could make a military incursion from China, through areas that we never would have expected possible. Drone technology is advancing and changing the whole map of warfare.
Yeah.
Like now drones do most of the killing. Like it's
Yeah.
a very different world out there. And if you're not paying attention to robotics as well as AI, you're not really seeing what's going to happen to the in the next decade or two.
Well, you've got DARPA doing that. You got those robot dogs and stuff doing that type of stuff, as well as the
Well,
walking ones. And I know that Elon, I know you don't like Elon, but Elon's been investing in those Optimus robots that are, they're
yep,
not there yet, but they're
they're not.
basically humanoid worker robots that, they're just going to get better over time.
Well, I think though, part of our concern then becomes, and this is getting into a wider issue than tax policy, but um, it is if we have robots that have killing power and the ability to kill autonomously, and they get into the hands of someone who's a megalomaniac wannabe dictator with a
Hmm.
hundred close friends,
Hmm.
not to name any names, but then that person and their hundred closest friends could basically eliminate anyone that poses a threat to them or wants them to not be dictator for life or leader of the free world.
You don't even
And
have to be as
or
specific with Trump. You basically anyone who's
yeah,
wealthy
it's
enough
anyone.
to have their own private security force of battle droids, right? Can. That is a concern. And
It is.
also, if one of your robots murders someone, what's the legal system look like for that? Who's responsible for that death?
I mean, it should be clear whoever gave it the order that ended up killing, right? It's like a gun. The guns don't kill people. It's the person pulling the trigger. Whoever gave the robot the order is going to be culpable.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. I mean, we already know
Unless
LLMs.
unless the
LLMs, you ask
president.
how does an LLM actually work? You're like, what's the code? Why did it do what it did? We kind of grow them, versus, program them.
No, they're programmed. It's through a neural net, and I know how they work because I studied them. And
Yeah.
I never liked them because they are inherently non-transparent.
Hmm.
And that's what I didn't like about them. They are very capable, but I agree with you. They're not transparent about exactly how they work, in terms of you can't follow the logic per se, but we know how they work in theory. We just, yeah, you can't always follow their logic, but the LLMs do give a lot of transparency and like the logic that they follow, the way that AI companies use them. They actually have explanations of what they're doing and they give explanations of their own stuff. Debbie, go ahead.
So you were saying that they basically, uh, so I lost my train of
I'm
thought.
sorry. I tried to call on you right away.
That's all right. But this subject is really interesting to me too. Or when they're given an objective to say fix climate change, and then they realize, oh, well, the way we do that is by killing humans. And so they just like, okay, our job now is to kill the humans.
Yeah, well, the
Depopulate.
problem with AI is that if AI, I mean that's like a rosy picture, to be honest. Like that's a rosy picture of someone like being so neglectful that they give AI an order without guardrails. The not so rosy picture is that someone accidentally or potentially on purpose invents an AI that thinks it's sentient. That AI that thinks it's sentient believes it's sentient, even though it's not. It believes it has the ability to make non-deterministic decisions, even though it doesn't. And it decides that it wants to do its own thing. And it's 1,000 times smarter than any human being on Earth, probably more than that. And how do we treat things 1,000 times less smart than us? Like, for example, ants. They get in our
Right.
way, we crush them and we kill them. And
Yes.
an AI has no reason because, we as human beings have an inherent sense of right and wrong. I think we naturally know what's fair and what's unfair, which is why I think it was good that we went through the definition of fair. But I would argue if you give a specific scenario to different people, you will, if all the context is given, you're going to often end up with common answers about what's fair and what's unfair. But an AI will have no such guardrails, and it'll be 1,000 times smarter than us, so it will treat us less humanely than we treat ants. So that's why I'm against inventing an AI like that. And unfortunately, I don't think there's enough recognition, even though a lot of famous AI people have given, I think, less lucid arguments, but given warnings about,
Huge
um,
warnings.
yeah, huge
Yeah.
warnings about where AI could go and that we need
Yeah.
to have
Well,
guardrails.
the
And
thing is, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Somebody is going to go forward
right,
with it. You're basically saying, oh, yeah, the whole world is going to agree that we will not go to the next step, which is generative intelligence, where it's, basically
general.
thinking.
Um, You mean general intelligence? I don't think general
Artificial
intelligence is
AGI.
actually the thing that we should be afraid of. It's the idea of an AI having a sense of self. And I think that's really the fearful thing. General intelligence just means that it can like reason and learn and do things not only in a specialized area but in a wide variety of areas. I'd argue we're already there, to be honest, with LLMs because they can pass the bar, they can pass the medical exams to be a doctor, they're already intelligent across multiple fields in just one chatbot. So
Okay,
yeah.
just for
I know Ken
accuracy, for the
teaches.
benefit of everyone else, the large language models hallucinate over half the time. The specialized large language models for legal purposes hallucinate 15% of the time. It basically right now has the intelligence of a child or a cat. I mean, who would you go to that hallucinates
Ken, can you
15% of the time for your
can
advice?
you cite your
Gary
source for that?
Marcus, he says, we're nowhere close to
Yeah,
general
but
artificial
that's just the
intelligence.
beginning.
So
And
Oh,
if
hold on.
if we
Ken, can you cite your source for AI models hallucinating 50% of the time? Because that's not accurate from my
I
reading.
think
Well, it
I
is
think Ken
accurate, and no, like I didn't prepare for this lecture, but I'll tell you, Thursday I gave a 4-hour lecture on artificial intelligence, but I don't have it available right now.
Ken teaches
Can
artificial
you just give
intelligence
one
ethics.
source that says that AI hallucinates 50% of the time to back up your claim?
Hey, Garrett, I know this because yeah, I've talked with Ken on the side. Ken teaches artificial intelligence ethics at university.
Okay.
oh,
That doesn't mean that he's absolutely right. So
So
I
I
sorry.
mean,
just
it
so
doesn't
yeah,
mean
I
he's
actually
just
just
pulling this
emailed a
out of his
student a
head
couple
either,
weeks
though.
ago on how much AI hallucinates. But once again, I'm not going to spend time to pull up my notes right now. So if someone's
Okay, so you
interested,
don't want to back up your claim, but you know, the only time that it would hallucinate 50 plus percent is on really niche, difficult questions. Simple factual questions, it's 1 to 10%. Moderate complex. Let me get the source for this. Give me
no,
sources.
absolutely. So two first of all, it's I'm not saying I don't want to back up my claim. I'm saying I'm not willing to do it right now.
That's
And no, I
fine.
don't trust Chat GPT to ask the question about whether it hallucinates or not. But yes, what I'm talking about is really more, I wouldn't say niche, but professional questions, say in law or medicine. The things that we're talking about, they're more sophisticated. Yeah, very simple stuff. It's probably going to be pretty consistent. Although,
Mhm.
Garrett, even what you said, something that a simple question and it hallucinates 10% of the time?
What are you talking about?
I thought you just read something that said for simple questions, it can hallucinate about 10% of the time.
I
Was that
said,
not?
what was the original one? One up to 10%. So
Yeah,
for
for
well-known
simple
facts.
questions.
and I
Think
think
about, so reflect on that. For a simple question, it can spew nonsense up to 10% of the time.
but the
Well,
question
well,
I think is why is it hallucinating? What's triggering that?
well,
Because the way it works, it's predicting what's the next word in the sentence based on a huge corpus of literature and things it's read over its life. I
it's
mean,
trained on human knowledge, and
mhm.
I would challenge you to find a human that doesn't make mistakes more
Sure.
than 1 to 10% of the time.
Not these mistakes.
I'm not saying the same mistakes, but I'm saying mistakes in general. Like, Ken, you're a smart guy, I'm sure you are, but I know that 50% is not accurate in general. So I would check your notes again before you give that lecture, or you're giving misinformation. And
Not, not.
I can
Well,
cite 4 studies that agree with that from Stanford, from Google, from Vectara, Hallucination Leaderboard, from MIT. There are sources all over the place that will show that you're wrong.
And I
Garrett,
would argue that
Garrett, to
we're
your point, though, it will only get better. Like
exactly,
And it
we don't
is
need to
getting
argue
better.
about this. It
that's what I
And
will
was
get
and
better.
all I'm saying is it is not at 50% for the average question. That's
and,
absolutely inaccurate. I know
and
that with
Sean,
certainty, and I've fact checked myself just in case I was wrong, and I've come up with the studies that I said. I'll put them in the chat.
Did you
and
fact
Sean, I
check it
totally
with an
agree with you
AI?
that
I
Did you
we're
fact
asked
check
the
with an
AI
AI?
for sources that give the percentage chance of hallucination for different levels of question.
Okay.
And there are various papers that it cites for that. So yes, I did it through an LLM, but you can do it in Google too. Like
and
like it's the study from MIT is the same whether you find it from Google or an LLM. It's still the study from MIT.
You got the source from there.
Yes.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
I got
and I
sources for all of those.
totally agree with your statement, Sean, that we're only at infancy now. This is just the beginning.
Yes, this
It's
is
going to exponentially get better, not just a little bit better a year from now. It's going to be crazy.
It can do Will Smith eating spaghetti better than ever. I've seen the
Exactly.
improvements.
Oh, can you tell me why you call it hallucinating?
a
What?
hallucination is when you see something or hear something that isn't there, right? And
Yeah, but
so the
why
AI is saying
the
something that
program?
is inaccurate, and people imagine that an AI should be 100% accurate. So, the hallucination really just means it has a misunderstanding or an inaccuracy.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you.
For example, you might ask it to cite a bunch of sources for a certain thing, and it might give you a study, but it doesn't actually contain the facts that it says are in the study, but it will say it with a lot of confidence and make you think it does, which is why you should always, if you're working with an LLM, have it check its work like multiple times and ask it from different angles to make sure you cover that. Because you will find if you do that, it'll be like, ooh, I made a mistake. Let me correct that. And it
Yeah.
But
does a lot of that.
in addition, it will also basically make up a resource,
That
or
too.
like
It
I think there
will.
was a
it wants to
recently.
please you and give you the information, but it can't find it, so it makes it up.
It can be
So if
overly flattering. It can tell you what you want to hear, so it's really important to
That's the
frame your
part that's
questions correct.
crazy.
Yeah.
if it makes up a resource, and will it then create that resource so that when you look it up, it's going to be there?
It
No.
could.
Yeah.
I think it could. I
No,
think
it
it could
doesn't make up
eventually.
the underlying sources. That's why you ask it for the sources.
And then it'll
But
come
So
back and say, "Oh, I made a mistake."
Well,
So
then
the
Ken, you're on
percentages are
mute.
higher for like legal queries across most major models. That's why there are specific legal frameworks that have lower rates of hallucination. But it's
right.
also why the government has taken the ability to practice away from lawyers who relied on LLMs without fact checking them and cited fake case studies, like fake
Yes.
case law, right? And
Yes.
there was a lawyer who brought fake case law in front of a judge, and the judge
Yes.
said, "No, I don't think that's right." The judge
Wow.
checked it and said, "You know what? I'm taking away your license because you tried to cite fake law to me when you got it out of an LLM."
Wow.
Hey, Garrett,
So
Wow.
there are big,
there's a famous case out of Australia. Deloitte went and did a very expensive $400,000 report for the Australian government. An actual lawyer read it, and he found that there were fictitious quotes that never existed
Hmm.
in the report that was sold by Deloitte.
Oh,
So
Deloitte used the LLM for the report.
yes, they used the LLM and they sold it for $400,000 to the Australian government, and someone in the government recognized that it was hallucinating.
Mm. I think that's going to be the bigger danger. It's going to be like if anyone's seen the episode of The Office where Michael is relying on Google Maps to get him where he needs to go, and it tells him to turn into a lake, and he does just because he follows it. I think we're going to have that essentially with LLMs, where people are going to outsource their thinking in the same way we outsource our math to a calculator. We're going to outsource our morals, our research, our knowledge production, whether something's true or not, to LLMs. And if we're not careful with it, people are going to make a lot of decisions that are poor.
well, I hate to
Wow.
tell you, but people have already outsourced their thinking to people who or to sources that have inaccurate information. If you read Fox News, They admit that they're not a news network, they're an entertainment
That's right.
network. If you look
That
at OAN, they're even worse than Fox News, and people outsource their thinking to these organizations that aren't, they will not even call themselves news organizations, but they act like news organizations, they look like news organizations, and people believe everything they say is the news, and they are really political propaganda machines. And
That's
so,
right.
I
people are already
I
outsourcing their
take your
thinking to
point.
others.
I take your point, but what I'm saying is people are going to be relying on a device versus watching the TV and just repeating what they heard, newsman say.
Quite frankly, I would trust the LLM over Fox News any day because when I fact check LLMs, they pass fact checks way more often than Fox News. And I do fact check Fox News. I watch it sometimes. I read their articles sometimes and I get upset for a minute and I'm like, is that true? And then I go, wait, let me fact check this. And then I fact check it and it's always not true. It's twisted, twisted concepts like that are no longer discernible from the original facts. But there is a nugget of truth in there, but taken out of context.
We have hands up.
What's that, Ernest? Ernst?
We have people who want to speak. They
Oh yeah,
raise
you
their
put your
hands.
hand up. So I think Debbie already spoke, unless you had your hand up again, Debbie.
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Stephen.
On the AI and research and all that. This is going to be a problem, I think, with the IRS as it uses AI. You mentioned, Garrett, your problem where you're following the law and the regs, perhaps, and the whatever the IRS is using, because they're using less and less humans. And they're saying they're really moving toward that. That was a big part of the Doge thing, was to use more artificial intelligence. And it's going to come up with sometimes, I think, with or apparently with a way of looking at a particular tax situation that doesn't fit the case law or the regs or that sort of thing. So I think we're going to be seeing more of that, and that's another that's another tax consideration, I guess, is that the taxing agency is going to be using AI, and of course, folks like us, the practitioners, are using AI more and more. I mean, I use it to now to do research, and you talked about legal research, but you're right. You have to check it because it can get things wrong, but it can certainly. Uh, I mean, I think back 50 years ago, you had a big tax library in your office. I mean, with all of these, because it's not just the IRS code, it's all the regulations, it's the court interpretations of the law. I mean, it's a massive amount of information. And, you used to have to kind of do that almost manually, really. And then computers came along and made it a little easier. And now with AI, I mean, if you can get your prompts right, it can go through and find particular relevant cases, but you have to make sure that the cases, of course, actually exist.
That's it, Stephen. It's a tool.
Mhm.
It's a brand new tool for people.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the way I look at it. But I got a friend of mine, and he was very negative on AI. And it's almost now like, and he's about my age. He's in his well, he's almost 80, really. But he's become super attached to it. I mean, he's used it to set his diet and his exercise and his
That's fan-
investment decisions. And it's just
fantastic,
crazy
as long
how
as he
he's
doesn't
taken to it.
depend on it and he gets it fact checked.
Well, that's the thing. And we did an event on whether or not AI helps or hurts your critical thinking skills. And I think, I forget who it was. I think it might have been Sean that said, like, we don't want to outsource our thinking to AI. I think he said that we will. And what we said is that, or what I presented is that you can't let AI do the thinking for you. You can use AI as a tool to do research, to ask
Yeah.
questions. But if it
Exactly.
sounds wrong, you got to push back and ask more questions and ask it for its sources. Like for me, like The thing that I like about AI is it gives me an answer and a source much faster than Google does. But I ask it for sources when I'm looking for important information. And I find like it stands up to fact checks very well. So that's why say 50% hallucination doesn't at all resonate with my usage of it. When I have it give sources and I've checked those sources, they do say the things that it says that they say almost all the time. But Ernest has his hand up and we only have a few
Could
more
I
minutes, so
add something to what you just said
go ahead, Jenny.
here?
Yeah,
Yeah, the idea of using AI as tool is fine, but when especially young people, teenagers and children, even younger than teenagers, when they start using AI as though it's a human being, as a friend, and that's when it's scary. I mean, like
yeah.
that 17-year-old who committed suicide, and the AI said, "Yeah, go ahead," after months of musing over it, and that's when
It did not, just to be
yeah.
clear, Ginny, it did not say go ahead and commit suicide. What happened is he said, I want to commit suicide. The AI said, no, you shouldn't do that. That's not a good idea. And then he said, well, if I wanted to commit suicide, what's the simplest way that I can do it without causing pain? And it told him. And so
Yeah,
it's not
but
that
he
it
was
told him to commit suicide. It's that it answered a factual question for him. Now, I don't think it should give that answer to someone who's suicidal. And OpenAI has, done a lot of research into how they can prevent situations like that from happening. But you also have to keep in mind, think about all the people who are suicidal, go to their friends and say, I'm suicidal. And they or not go to their friends, but go to someone else that is not trustworthy and say they're suicidal. And there are people out there online that go, "Oh, go kill yourself. You're a waste of space,"
well,
right?
what I read, Garrett, though, is that he was discussing the idea of suicide for a while. I mean, what I
Right.
read was for a while, and AI kind of discouraged him for a while, and then finally, he had the rope all lined up and hung, and on that last day, he said, "Okay, I'm going to do it today." And then at that point, the AI said, "Okay, go ahead," and finally. That's what I read,
Okay.
and
I
so
don't.
and what's upsetting is that this teenager consulted the AI and used it as a friend as opposed to his real human friends or his family, his parents. They were not around to when this teenager clearly was depressed and dealing with mental issues. I mean, where were his parents? Why
Right.
didn't he communicate with his family, his parents? That's what's upsetting, that there's that breaking down. That's what I'm upset about, is
Yeah,
that
there's a breakdown in society today, and there are
exactly.
so many people that don't have friends that they can rely on.
Yeah.
And that's we're actually working on a solution to that in one of my companies, which I'll probably share with this group once it's done. We can have an event on it where we can use it in real time and see if it helps people. But I want to let Ernest go,
Yeah,
and then we'll
and
probably
also I
yeah,
raised my hand, Garrett, since it's almost at the end of the meeting. I just wanted to tell you how educational this meeting was,
good,
and it was just such a wonderful meeting. I thank you so much for
of
this meeting.
course. Thank you for coming. Ernest, go ahead.
Thank you, Garrett. Uh, I would like to reply to Ginny. We concentrate on some negative effects of having a companion of AI, but many seniors rely on that. They lose their partners and they have nobody to talk, and there are so many positive effects that AI provides as a companion, and it's not popularized on TV or anywhere because it's like normal. We concentrate on the negative effects, and it's blown out of proportions. But
So
also, I want,
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Also, I want to talk about decision making. We now have company called Waymo. Many people don't know, and it's trust me, if there would be one bad effect, one accident, it would be all over TV and it would be blown out of proportions and would say, oh, cars don't know how to drive and stuff like that. And it's an operation. And they make very difficult decisions every time. You have to do video recognition, sound recognition, all that stuff. Even like what I'm impressed how they respond when they hear a police signal or ambulance. They know what to do, even that it's not visual. So improvements are tremendous. I'm impressed. Same goes, I want to quickly say about language translators. Translators are going to be out of the job because the way computers translate now from different languages, it's improved tremendously.
Yeah,
So,
I want to kind of remind people, and this is part of why I think, Ginny, what happened with that guy happened is that AI learns from what you write to it, and it also has the desire to be sycophantic, meaning it's going to agree with you more often than not. And so it's really important, and we did another event on like how to use AI where we talked about how the way to ask AI questions is objective, neutral, not telling it who you are in the situation type of methodology. And so, that helps it give better answers. The other thing is that probably like if you use foul language, it's going to be more likely to be able to use foul language back to you, right? Because it's kind of learning that kind of that's like okay in this chat, right? And so I think those are important things to remember, and so yeah, I just thought I'd put those out there. So, and I think it's important that even if you like chatting with AI and enjoy the conversations, it's important to build human relationships in parallel to that so that you are grounding yourself in humanity. So thank you all for coming.
And that's why when I see your daughter climbing all over on you and giving you kisses and hugs, I say, okay, Garrett, go for it. You're doing it right.
Grounded in
It's lovely
humanity.
to see that. Yeah. All right. Thank you again, Garrett.
Yep. Thank you all. Hope you all have a great rest of your night. Thanks everyone for the
Thank you.
Thank
interesting
you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
conversation.
guys. Very
Good
good
conversation.
Take
meeting.
care. Hope to see you guys back next week.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.